Thanks all for jumping on. So before we jump in to any items, I do want to make sure we have an opportunity for Scott Wood, our newest CAB member, to introduce himself and provide a little bit more background. For those who are in the last meeting, Scott was able to attend as a member of the public, but hadn't officially been confirmed as a new member of CAB, so wasn't really able to participate. So warm welcome to Scott. Scott, I'll let you jump in and you could maybe provide a quick background on the type of work you do and how long you've been in Concord, anything else you want to share.
Sure. Well, thanks for the welcome, Jake. Yeah, well, Scott Wood, I think some of you may already know that I spend my days working at EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, where I run a program called Climate Corps, which is a sort of on its surface, a summer fellowship program where we place graduate level students with companies and cities and public sector institutions to help advance their climate and energy goals, but also consists of kind of managing a network of all of our alumni from that program and keeping them engaged and empowered with professional development and other opportunities to extend their impact in their careers. So I've been with EDF for just shy of 10 years now, and all of that time working on that program in a number of different roles. But yeah, my wife and 2-year-old and I moved to Concord about 1.5 years ago. Looking forward to the day when we can actually really meet our neighbors and maybe invite some folks over for a barbecue or something. But now the community's been extremely welcoming of us. And when I learned about, a little bit about the work that the community's been doing and that Kate's been leading on the town's climate efforts and sustainability efforts, I was interested in seeing if I might be able to, get involved and help in some way, and was kind of pointed to this committee, and it seemed like a great opportunity. So I'm really excited to be here and hope I can contribute. And also wanted to say, John Balduck, I don't know if you remember from several years ago, but I sat on a committee in Cambridge that wasn't all that dissimilar from this one, and that was, I think, my spin at municipal involvement on some level. So have you to thank for that initial experience.
You're welcome.
Awesome, Scott. Well, thanks so much. Any quick questions for Scott from anyone else? I guess we could try and do quick intros. I don't, what do we think? Do we have time for that? A few minutes, everyone just quickly go around the horn for Scott's benefit. Everyone okay with that?
Sure, it sounds great.
Okay. Well, Scott and I have met, and so I won't belabor with an additional intro, but Michael, why don't you go first and then we'll go to Brian.
Yes, indeed. Well, Scott, first of all, it's great to have you. I think you bring our average age down a little bit, and that's really, really good. So welcome. My previous experience has been primarily working with the investor-owned utilities, and I was director of strategic planning for National Grid for quite a few years, and excited about being on this board because I have a great deal to learn about how you take what is sort of from a regulatory environment into how do we create change within municipal structures? And I'm learning every day how to do it well. So I'm happy to have you with us.
Thanks, Michael. Brian?
Yep, Brian Krauns. Currently work at Wayfair, where I do supply chain design. So we build warehouses and ship furniture and so forth. Have a big carbon footprint that we're actually measuring for the first times, which poses, as we know, data challenges. So I've been involved with that. I've been involved with energy and environmental topics in the town of Concord for at this point, many years. I was on the light board at one point. I was maybe a founding member of CSEP, I think, and a few other committees, solar committee and so forth. So then I took a pause to focus more on youth sports. And so I was president of CC of the youth soccer organization for a little while, but now I'm getting back into the energy thing. So that's me in a nutshell.
Warren?
Hi, Brian, Scott, excuse me. Welcome aboard. It sounds like you'll have a lot to add to our group. I'm Warren Leon. I'm Executive Director of the Clean Energy States Alliance. We're a national membership organization composed of state energy agencies across the country.
All right, John, and then Courtney.
I'm still an environmental planner in Cambridge, so you know about that. I think probably since you were there, and I'm trying to remember exactly when that was, but I work more on climate adaptation these days with still some mitigation work.
I'm Courtney. I apologize, I missed your intro, but I'm a wastewater engineer. I do wastewater infrastructure engineering and planning design, and sort of a personal professional passion is how sustainability and green intersect with that, and in all forms of infrastructure, but specifically in water and wastewater. So.
Awesome. I think just from a time perspective, I'm going to limit the intros to the core CAB team. But Scott, we also have several folks also on the line from the public, and Alice, who's doing some great work with RMI and others around policy work, and is on the light board, along with Brian, who used to be on CAB and now is on the light board. So you'll learn, all of the names will start coming together for you. But thanks everyone for taking the time to do that. I think it's especially, in this environment we're in, it's tough to kind of make those connections. And so appreciate the additional time to do that. Okay, so I think we can jump in now to the official meeting and getting into the meeting and the minutes. I don't know if hopefully folks had some time to review the minutes from the last meeting that I think Courtney pulled together. Thank you, Courtney, for that. And this was the recap from the light board presentation, their decarbonization plan, as well as a couple of other topics. Any comments or feedback on the meeting minutes? Any concerns or changes or adjustments that anyone wanted to make?
Jake, I know that we're going to talk more about the CMLP presentation, and the minutes were really, really good. One just very quick comment I wanted to make is that as you go back and read through them, and maybe we can all recall the conversation, but most of it was dedicated to the supply side of CMLP's business, which is good, right? And I was thinking that as we filter that and think about our own plan, maybe it would be helpful in the future to have a deep dive from leadership at CMLP to talk about the demand side, which is a good deal of what our plan is in addition to the supply side. So it's just a note that I think that might be helpful perhaps in 2 or 3 months, or maybe even earlier, to get a deep dive on that. That was my reaction, but I thought the minutes were great.
Okay, yeah, sure. And we can certainly, that can be a topic that we all discuss as part of the, one of the agenda items we have in terms of recap. So thanks for that. Warren?
I'll agree that the minutes were very good, and I'll move to accept them.
All right, can I get a second on that?
A second.
All right, let's now voting. We're going to take a vote to approve the meeting minutes. If everyone can just raise your hand who approves. All right.
Great.
Thank you so much.
And just a note, John, I'm not sure if you checked the schedule, but you're on for minutes for today's meeting. Take that as a no, but now.
Congratulations, John. Sorry. Yes, I did. Thank you, Kate, for mentioning that. We have and for Scott's benefit, Scott, I think you're up in April, but we have on the second page of the meeting packet, sort of the rotation of folks who are, which we decided would be more democratic than assigning someone to have to take notes every time. So thank you,
Jake.
John.
Yeah,
And
Jake,
we have
just
the benefit now of Zoom recording, so that can help with going back and catching stuff that you missed.
Hey, Jake, could I just interrupt for 1 second?
Yes.
I don't think, unless I missed it, I don't think I received the meeting packet for tonight's meeting. If one was sent around, so I don't know if it's possible to share that.
Yes. Apologies for that. You may not have been on the list, or maybe we had an incorrect email. So Kate, is that something you can send off to Scott right now? Awesome. Sorry about that, Scott. Okay. So let me provide a quick update here. And I'm really just going to go through some of the topics that we're going to cover tonight. You're going to hear from Kate, I think, as part of her update about Senator Barrett's bill that the governor vetoed, which has implications for, and Alice is also going to give you a lot of background. There's been a lot of developments on that. And so we'll kind of talk through that and some next steps coming out of that. So we've carved out time for that tonight. We're going to, as we've talked about a little bit, go through some feedback on the CMLP presentation on their decarbonization plan. And really just wanted to we didn't have a lot of time to talk through that. So really wanted to get everyone's feedback, thoughts, additional questions, or topics that you think are relevant for CAB moving forward. And then Kate's going to give us an update on the greenhouse gas inventory, which we talked about a couple of months ago, I think, kind of the need for that. And so she's gone through and done some work on pulling that information together and get an update on that. And then, to, I guess, Michael's earlier point around, the demand side and how the light plant really talked about supply versus demand. One of the things that in the next meeting that I'm hoping to walk us through is around the home energy scores. So I've been doing some research into that topic and what other communities are doing. And this is really the idea that on the residential side, that you provide some sort of footprint and metrics to homeowners around how efficient the home is, whether it's at the time of sale or in other ways. And so there's some unique capabilities that the town has to potentially address that with, considering we have the light plant. So my goal is to have something for us to talk about in the next meeting in February. And then I think we're also going to try and talk through potential for commercial ordinances. And John has offered to dig into that a little bit in one of our next meetings. So just wanted to, and I know we're going to have additional conversations related to the RMI accelerator and the work that's ongoing around policies for electrification. So I just wanted to give you a heads up on that, and I can now pass it over to Kate for her update.
Great, thanks, Jake. So I sent an update in the meeting packet, but a few things that are going on. Jake mentioned the climate bill. It's been a bit of a roller coaster in that sense, where the conference committee was working on a bill where we had no idea what was happening. It came out, it passed overwhelmingly. It sat on the governor's desk. It did not get signed by the governor. And so now there's a new legislative session and they have filed another bill that is pretty much the same. So we'll keep you posted on that, but it's been a lot of ups and downs. The select board did submit a letter to the governor when the bill was on his desk, urging him to sign it, which was good. And I included that in the packet so you could see what that letter looked like. So we're staying on it and hopefully we'll get some progress on a climate bill soon. A couple other things coming up. CSEC is taking on a project to collect some case studies about Concord residents who have electrified their homes, so specifically heat pumps and other climate-friendly home improvements. So if you or anyone you think would be a good case study for that, let me know and we can coordinate reaching out to them. I'm also planning to bring on another summer fellow this year through the UNH Sustainability Institute. So that was last summer. We had Abigail, who worked on the guide for sustainability in historic and older homes. And the summer before was Courtney, who looked at commercial sector greenhouse gas reduction opportunities. And this summer, I've scoped the project around researching financing mechanisms for energy efficiency and electrification, because this was one of the top implementation steps in our climate action plan. And I think is something that's just really important that we tackle. So I'm excited about that. We got approved by UNH to be part of the program. So now they're recruiting students and we'll be going through that process over the next few months. And then the last thing is just, I mentioned this last time, but the middle school building committee is meeting again with an ambitious schedule to move forward on the feasibility study and schematic design. So the sustainability subcommittees has 2 upcoming meetings. One is tomorrow morning, and then the full committee meets next on February 11th. So I will keep you posted on that, but there will be some community forums and opportunity for community input. So I'll be sure to share that with you all so you can attend individually, or if the committee wants to submit any kind of collective feedback, I can keep you posted on when would be a good time for that. So I'll stop there. Questions?
Can you remind me who's on that sustainability subcommittee?
It's me, Matt Root, Charlie Parker, Don Gariello, who's one of the co-chairs of the committee, Lori Hunter, who's the superintendent, and Frank Cannon, who's a volunteer, and Russ Hughes, who's the facilities director for the schools. I think that's it.
Great,
It's a
thank you.
large committee. Consequently, the subcommittees are also large.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. John? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, on the climate bill, you might know this too, Kate, there's an effort to collect, folks probably read the governor cited as one of his concerns that he thought the bill would cause a negative effect on housing production, especially the net zero building code. So there's an effort to collect information about projects that have already happened. So Built Environment Plus, which is what the U.S. Green Building Council Massachusetts chapter became, and the Boston Society of Architects is collecting that data. So if folks know of projects where there's cost data, it'd be great to submit that, and it's going to be collated, and effort's going to be made to counter that argument.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Sean. Anybody else?
All right. Great. Thanks, Kate. So we will move right along to the RMI accelerator and the updates that we sort of talked about. There's been a lot, and I think Alice, you were going to lead that, and Kate's going to chime in, right? So I'll hand it over to Alice.
I actually think Kate can do this one, right?
Okay.
I was thinking I would do backup on this one.
Okay. Well, sorry that I don't mean to
That's
put
okay.
anyone in a spot or bind.
I'm happy to fill in.
We'll
No
start with
worries.
Kate then.
Yeah. So, so you all know the context for the RMI accelerator, but just briefly for anyone new to this, Alice and I, as well as Michael and Pam Hill and Gary Kleiman, have been participating in this building electrification accelerator program run by RMI. And so they have 15 or 16 Massachusetts communities that are interested in figuring out how can we accelerate electrification, especially given the Attorney General's decision last year on Brookline's attempt to pass a bylaw that said no more fossil fuel infrastructure. So we've been part of this process for several months now, and it's all wrapping up. Actually, we have a final meeting tomorrow. And so when, as we've been developing our strategy, we're kind of taking this three-prong approach. One was to send a non-binding resolution from the select board to the state legislature saying, we need you to take action here because our hands are tied in terms of what we can actually require at the local level. The second strategy was to do a home rule petition to ask for permission to do what we wanted to do in the first place. And the third one was to work on zoning incentives. So when the climate bill was passed and we were hoping the governor would sign it, we kind of regrouped and said, well, maybe these strategies don't need to happen now, because if we have a net zero stretch code, that kind of solves the problem. Then since the climate bill was not signed, now we're back to our original plan. So again, it's been some ups and downs. So now we're back to the original plan of doing the non-binding resolution, which CAB has already agreed to ask the select board to sign. So we'll hope that Jake can just move that forward. And then also the home rule petition for town meeting. So maybe Alice, you can talk a little bit more about the home rule petition and what the ask is for CAB.
Okay. The whole strategy may change again as we see what happens. The legislature is taking up the bill tomorrow for a vote. So we wanted to send this non-binding resolution to urge them to be aggressive in their next vote. And so it's coming before them tomorrow, and they may already make a decision on that. So a non-binding resolution may or may not be necessary, but I think we should move forward, get it on the docket, have the select board ready to sign, and then we can email it out on Monday after the meeting if possible. But if we don't need it, that's great. So the home rule petition is part of that three-pronged strategy that basically asks the legislature to give us the authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions in Concord. And this is notwithstanding all the other state laws and of the building code and the gas code. It says, Concord, you can go ahead and do this because you have a local climate action strategy and you have a mandate from your local town meeting that you take certain steps to be able to meet your local mandate. So the home rule petition is always strongest when it's accepted and proposed by the select board. So the ask here is, I know CAB has talked about this several meetings ago about whether it would want to take on this as a CAB project or a CAB initiative. And the first step would be to bring it to the select board and tell them that that's what you're doing. And it would be unusual, I think, for a committee to bring a home rule petition article on its own. And the select board would then think about whether they are willing to bring it forward. The select board was willing to bring forward Article 40. They voted to support it. It was on the warrant for last year's town meeting. And the timing was such that we didn't move it because the Brookline decision came out just before our town meeting. So basically, it goes back to where we were with the select board at the last year's town meeting, where they would have moved Article 40. So this says, in order for us to move Article 40, we need the authority to do it. So it requests a home rule petition for the authority, and it includes a copy of Article 40 as the thing that we wanted to do once we had the authority. There are probably at this point about 9 communities, I think, that are moving forward with a home rule petition for their local town meetings. Arlington, Newton, Lexington, Belmont, Acton, Concord, is that 9? I can't remember. So we are a number of communities. We've met with Mike Barrett and Tammy Govea, and walked through the Concord strategy with them, and both were supportive of our strategy, depending on where we are with the legislature, on where they are in moving ahead with the climate bills and where the governor is. But they agreed that this would be helpful to them, and it would be helpful because it creates a mandate when multiple communities and multiple districts are asking for the same kind of authority. It says there's a movement happening. It's not a big movement. It's not enough of a drive to say you've got, a half a dozen or a dozen communities. It's better if we had 50 or 100. We don't have that yet because this particular RMI project included 17 communities. Some are different places than others in moving forward with similar strategies. So that's the summary. So the ask here is for CAB to take on the home rule petition as an initiative that was basically move forward to the select board with a presentation that says this is the strategy for us to be able to regulate greenhouse gas emissions in our town.
Great, thanks, Alice. Anything else you would add, Kate?
No, I don't think so. I think that was a good summary. And I think Alice's point that this strategy could change again, right? If there is a climate bill that's passed that the governor signs, then maybe this isn't necessary. But the thinking of, our little RMI team was that better to be prepared and have this teed up for town meeting because there are, upcoming deadlines. And, in the end, decide we don't need to move it than to, not have it ready to go and have to wait another year.
And Jake, if I could just jump in, this is Jane.
Of
I
course,
would
Jane.
love to be able to vote on this as the outgoing select board member on the select board. It'd be great if the governor instead signed something before and we didn't have to do this, but I would welcome this on the select board if that's the route we go.
That's great, Jane. And Jane, do you have any, suggestions for CAB in terms of process? Like what makes it the most sense for CAB to kind of vote to request the select board take it up, or what's the best way to proceed?
Well, if depending on how you guys work this through tonight, if you want to put it on the town warrant for this upcoming town meeting, then we should get it into process now, because you can always pull a warrant, even after publication. You can pull an article, but better safe than sorry. So let me know when it's ready to go, and I'll put it on an agenda.
Great, thanks.
I might add that at this point, it has been drafted and it's ready to go. And it was with the intent that we would present February 27th for whoever was going to take it to the town meeting coordinating meeting, or February 27th.
Right, so it'd be great if we could see it, just have somebody come by and remind us at the select board. We meet every Monday night, so convenient. So just so that everybody who is on the select board now, who might not have focused on this in previous iterations or in previous select boards, is ready.
Just one question I have is, isn't the timing of the warrants before our next meeting? So.
No, I don't think so. I think
Okay.
that February 27th is
February
the coordinating meeting. The warrant gets open at that meeting, or is that right, Jane, right after that?
I think it's right. I think that's the opening meeting. But I will quickly check on that while the meeting goes on.
Yeah, I think it may open at that meeting or just shortly. The select board has to open the warrant. I don't know if it happens on the 27th or the following Monday, but it's open in March. So you'll meet before that. But the select board would need to have a little briefing beforehand and a copy of what's being proposed. This, by the way, the draft that I think all of you have seen has not gone through legal review yet in town. So it would probably, if you agree to take on this project, it would be good to get the okay to have legal counsel look at it, make sure that, or the town moderator to review it, to make sure the language fits with Concord's bylaw or home rule petition request. And I modeled it after other petitions that the town has submitted for home rule petition, home rule legislation.
So just to be clear, what are the next steps that we can take in this meeting, or that we need to take in this meeting to move forward? I mean, I certainly can have any feedback and comments from CAB on what Kate and Alice just shared. But what else do you need from us at this point?
I think it's a vote of the board that this is a part of your agenda, like you had taken on the non-binding resolution and voted, it was an act of the board vote that said, yes, you'll move this forward. It's the same kind of action that would be needed tonight to be able to move forward and take it to the select board.
Yeah, and I think if the board votes to say, yeah, we want to support this and move to the select board, then as Jean said, it will be getting on a select board agenda and kind of presenting it as this is what we want to do. Will the select board sponsor it for town meeting?
Okay. All right. Any questions or feedback on that discussion and from anyone? And then I think I can look to see if folks are comfortable voting to move this forward to the select board, but I want to take any feedback or comments before we do that.
It sounds like the same process that we did with the non-binding resolution, right? Where we voted, letter gets written, gets taken over to the select board. We ask the select board to sponsor it, but it has the backing of the CAB. Is that pretty much what we're really talking about?
I believe so. And I believe as far as this getting on the warrant, that wouldn't be CAB doing it, right? Would it be a citizen or the select board itself?
So at the coordinating committee meeting in the end of February, someone would need to present this as an item that would requesting that it go on the warrant. That can be a member of this committee. It can be someone from the RMI team. It could be Kate, could be anyone, even if the select board had voted to support this and to sponsor it. It could be anyone making the presentation at the coordinating committee meeting.
Okay.
So if this were to move forward, maybe this is premature, I don't know, but then we would, as the town, become able to regulate our emissions. Who does that? Like, who within the town does that? And we figure that, do we have a framework for that, or just does that exist for, as an example? And is there a cost impact there to the town that has to be considered? Or maybe as a CAB, we don't have to figure all that out or know that, we can just support it, I guess. Can
I answer that?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a really good question to ask. Really helpful to hear and worth thinking about. So at this point, the home rule petitions ask the legislature for the authority to specifically require all new construction in Concord be fossil fuel free.
Okay.
That's basically what it says.
Okay.
Article 40 could manage greenhouse gas emissions, and the first step was requiring all electric construction for new construction. So it's limited. It's not broad ranging in scope. Like your question was really good. Like, how big is this? It's not big. It's the first nibble. And it really relates only to new construction.
Okay.
And the legislature would have to approve it, which is a whole nother hurdle. Yeah. So it has to get through the town approval process. Then it goes to the legislature. Then they would have to approve, and I think that there's definitely time involved in all of that, right? I mean, it needs to work through the process. So.
Yeah. I believe Concord had a home rule petition before the legislature last legislative session that didn't make it all the way through. It was far less controversial. Jane probably knows more
Yeah.
about it, but it changed the rules for the town caucus. And the request just for home rule legislation just didn't make it through in time.
In fact, we had a number of home rule petitions. Another one with relating to
Affordable housing.
and nothing, but the point was there were no home rule petitions voted on by the legislature before they ended session. So we weren't alone. This was not singling out or a judgment about anybody's home rule petition. They just didn't get done at all. Hence, anybody who knows was at caucus outside in the Harvey Wheeler parking lot on last Monday.
So part of the strategy on the home rule petition is not that we'd actually get it, we might, but hearing what happened last legislative session and what the schedule is in the legislature, it is to have a place to be able to educate the community about what we're trying to do, to pick up where we left off before last town meeting when we had presented at a public hearing, we've been at different forums talking about Article 40. So it keeps the conversation live and growing in Concord. And when you bring it to town meeting, it's an opportunity to take questions and to answer and to think through. And for citizens who attend, could be, I don't know what's on the agenda this year, but, upwards towards 1,000 people can show up at town meeting. And that's a great place to have a conversation about climate issues. So it serves multiple purposes, even if we don't get it approved by the legislature.
Great, thanks, Alice. Any other questions? I think we have 5 or 6 more minutes for this topic, and we need some time to vote to move this forward or not. Anyone else with a question? Okay. So I think, I need someone to make a motion to vote on this. I can't do that as the chair. So is there anyone who would like to?
I'll make a motion.
Ruthie?
I think I'm making a motion that we are supporting the request for home rule and that we're taking it to the select board. I make
Correct.
that motion.
I'll
Thank
second
you.
it.
And I would second that.
Okay, great. All right, all those in favor of supporting the home rule petition to be brought to the select board and voted on by the select board, or whatever the correct terminology is, sorry. Please raise your hand or your virtual hand. I believe that's unanimous, so I won't ask if anyone is opposing. Thank you all. Great, so we'll move forward with that, and I guess I can work through with Kate and Alice on the logistics of anything I need to help with in terms of getting that in front of the select board, as well as Jane.
Jake,
Yes.
yeah, Jake, do you want to heads up on which Monday you'd want to aim for? Because the sooner I can put that on our chair's lap, the better.
Okay. Any initial thoughts on that, Kate or Alice, which Monday we want?
So for home rule petition, I'm probably give us a couple of weeks for everybody to review again what the home rule petition says, review Article 40, make whatever last changes, and then present it to the select board. I mean, we can always edit more, and the sure town council will weigh in too. But I would just want to make sure that if we do it in a couple of weeks, that we should try and do we should do the non-binding resolution Monday, this coming Monday, because if the legislature is about to vote, it'd be great to get that out this Monday. Have the home rule petition a couple of weeks later. Does that sound doable? Or how much time do you think your board needs to review the documents and think about them before presenting to the select board? I guess it's mostly for whoever's going to be presenting.
That was a question for Jane, right?
No,
No.
That was a question for you. The document has not changed since it was circulated to the CAB some number of months ago, and I'm sure everyone's forgotten what's in it.
So
before,
the non-binding resolution, we've already previously had sort of approved
Yep.
moving that, and then we put that on pause as you guys described. So I think nothing has changed with that. So I think that's just moving it forward because we're on pause.
Right.
And I think the home rule petition, we just voted on supporting. And then it's a matter of if, assuming you can come back on February 24th with the specific language, I think you're saying we would review that and provide any feedback or concerns, but we're still saying we support it overall. And then after that, it would move through the process. Is that correct? Or am I misunderstanding?
Jane, what do you think about the timing for the select board to hear about this home rule petition that the CAB is going to move forward and ask the select board to support?
You mean, i.e. the former Article 40?
Yep. Which the current board was on most of it, I think.
Right.
When that was approved.
Yeah, my thought is if the current non-binding resolution is going to get, we'll be reminded of that this Monday. I will also then mention that this is coming in my liaison report, assuming we have time at the end of our meeting that sometimes gets cut short. And then I would say 2 weeks from there, why not? I mean, February is a short month, so we don't want to sit on this. And my point is simply, sometimes the process of making an agenda gets very opaque because of the way we're doing things these days. So the sooner I can let our chair know this is coming and to make space for it on an agenda, then, even if it's in 2 weeks, I'll know, you'll know that it's on the agenda in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks. That's my point. I'm not jamming you. I do think it would be unlikely to have CAB Monday to Monday. So Monday the 1st, one thing, and then Monday the 14th. That makes sense?
Jake, does that work for you or Kate?
Is that, Jane, are you guys going to meet on that holiday? The 15th is President's Day.
I thought it was maybe I'm getting my dates. Oh, I'm ignoring. Probably not. So, although it has me scheduled for it, but who knows? So maybe you want to do it closer because otherwise you're all the way to Monday. If we don't, yeah, on the Monday the 22nd. Well, look, it's not news. We have seen this before, most of us. So yeah, Monday the 22nd is fine too.
Okay, that sounds good.
Okay.
So Jake, we can coordinate offline about what you need to send to who to get on the agenda.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Thanks all.
And for anybody new, especially Scott, we're really not that scary in the select board. We don't bite people and we don't eat our young usually.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Great to hear.
You just might end up with a screenshot of your Zoom face in the paper, but it's all good.
Thanks for that, Kate. That's really, that's a happy thing to keep.
Fair warning.
All right. I think we're ready to move on to our next topic, which is really just an opportunity for anyone who's interested on CAB in bringing up feedback, concerns, kudos, anything related to the light plants presentation, decarbonization presentation. And we are gonna, in speaking with John, and I know John in the past had brought up a perspective on RECs. And so we have offered him some time as part of this conversation to talk about that perspective. And So we'll make sure we carve out some time for that. But sort of before that, really just want to get any feedback from folks. I think overall it seemed like it was a valuable session for everyone to get a little bit more insight into what the light plant was doing, and appreciate all the good questions that we had. And so I'm just going to open it up now for any thoughts that anyone on CAB has.
One thought that I had is that listening to it, first of all, it's admirable, right? I think we would all agree having 100% renewable energy by 2030 is a pretty significant goal. I was surprised about within that, non-emitting nuclear is a very significant part of. If I recall right, I thought it was even up in the neighborhood of 40%. I don't think I understand that whole the wedges that fit into what CMLP has as their strategy that contributes to getting to that remarkable 100% renewable energy by 2030. But that stood out to me, and maybe there's other members on the CAB or have a deeper appreciation of that. But it would be good to just talk about that a little bit, because it surprises me. Nuclear energy for 40%, non-emitting, and maybe I misunderstood. I don't know. What did others think?
No, I would go ahead, Warren.
Yeah, I raised the nuclear issue at the meeting because I was somewhat surprised about that. And they did have a reasonable answer. I'm not sure I completely agree with it, but they had a reasonable answer as to why they thought it was accomplishing something, purchasing power from nuclear. But whatever, it seems like it's a done deal. So there's not much that could be done about it. They now have a long-term contract to get a significant amount of electricity from nuclear. So it is what it is.
Okay.
I think John, you have some input, and I know Brian, I think wants to chime in as well. Brian Folds, but we'll go to John first.
Yeah, I mean, I think Michael's asking how can it be 100% renewable if we're contracted for, I can't remember how many years, for a non-renewable source. So in a way, it sounds like it almost precludes the 100%, achieving the 100% goal.
Just to clarify, my understanding was it was 100%, that the goal is to have carbon-free electricity, and therefore nuclear is considered a non-emitting source, and therefore that it's open, and it's baseload power, and I think that's what they see as a near-term option for helping to get towards the goal. At least that was the explanation that we heard. And what maybe we can hear quickly from Brian on this, because I know Brian's super close to it and is also a member of the Light Board. I guess you're speaking in your role as a citizen tonight, or do we need to clarify anything? Okay.
No, just speaking as a citizen, and you actually just made the point. Article 51 from 2017 Concord Energy Goals was for non-emitting energy, 100%, not renewable energy by 2030. Which is a big difference. And I agree with the board that the people who voted for that article were thinking of renewable energy being the non-emitting. And that was how it was interpreted. But the actual wording allows for non-emitting. So nuclear qualifies. And where I've seen many discussions happen here, select board as well as the light board, about nuclear energy. We do have a contract that we've already entered into, so that's a done deal. But as for more contracts, there was a vote 3-1 to do an expansion of that contract, and there was comments given about how we don't necessarily desire nuclear energy. It does have a benefit to cost, which I have to point out. It does lower rates, and lower rates increases adoption of electricity as a fuel, and that is important for scaling. But this is definitely a difficult topic.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think it is what it is, particularly if contracts have been signed. But if I'm surprised, I'm imagining some other people might be surprised if they were to look at the portfolio and they would say, "What?" You know, there's always been this little bit of tension in the environmental community anyway, whether there should be any non-emitting nuclear. And the wisdom seems to be, you know, as much as nuclear does present certain risks, that to make the whole portfolio possible, that some percentage of renewable seems to be what we should accept. I think people will be surprised if we get to a point and that it is 40%. Holy smokes, that sort of is, it seems a little bit more difficult to square. And it may be that maybe it won't be 40%, maybe it'll only be 12%. You know, when we actually get to those supply side options, that where we find out that renewable energy, true, I don't know if I'd call it wind, solar, or hydro, become far less expensive. And so all of a sudden we see the slice of renewable dropping down, of nuclear dropping down dramatically, then we'll probably be okay. But I just think we should be prepared to at least have a position or an understanding that that nuclear is a pretty dominant piece of this overarching goal, which we're so admirable about on 2030, to be you know, renewable energy. I'm not sure the layperson would, you know, or the citizenry would entirely agree with that. And maybe it's just a cautionary note to be aware of.
Other thoughts on any topics that the light plan brought up?
I just had a question on what Michael just said about, you know, do we have any ability to manage or have input on the percentage of the overall light plant that is nuclear? I know you said 40%, and then you said, well, maybe if wind and solar become, you know, less expensive or whatever, then the percentage changes. But do we have any ability to have an input on that, or it's kind of like we weren't tight enough in the language, and so here we are?
Right.
Is that kind of what we're at?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could, certainly CAB could decide that if we wanted to provide some specific feedback, but I think in terms of Article 51, there's, you know, there's the flexibility. And I think, you know, the challenge, I think, with some of the renewables too, is just, you know, where the resource is and where we are, right? So a lot of that wind resource isn't necessarily located near us, and so there's transmission, and then, you know, there's great wind resource in Texas, but, you know, so a lot of the corporations are using these PPA agreements and virtual PPAs, and I don't think that necessarily works for municipals. I'm not sure, but you know, I think there's that reality of the resource and balancing the resource against the need and the requirements, in addition to the storage issue and everything else. So I think there's some legitimate barriers there, but I felt, just from my perspective, that you know, I understand the light plant's running their, you know, they're running it kind of like a business, and there are impacts and costs that are incurred like outside of the light plant that the whole community bears that don't necessarily hit their balance sheets. So, you know, I think particularly in on-site renewables, there's opportunity, you know, it would be great to see some more innovation where they can continue to support and have financing models that help citizens or outside folks, you know, install community solar or what have you in the Concord area to continue to build our, local capabilities for renewables, knowing that, probably not going to have windmills going up, but it just sort of, we heard a lot about the barriers and the challenges, which I'm sure are real and they're continuing to face in terms of transmission and limitations there. But I think there's, and I'm hopeful with the middle school that there'll be some collaboration there in terms of that building and what we can do from an on-site installation of solar on the building, like with the light plant kind of involved early on. So we'll see about that, but I think that's an opportunity. I don't have any solutions there, but I was glad to hear that they're thinking about how can they continue to drive solar adoption and come up with financing models that make sense. So it's not, on citizens to fund that entirely, and we can scale it a little bit more. John?
Yeah, so Michael mentioned earlier that it'd be great to hear more about sort of the non-supply side of what the light plant's doing. So what I didn't get, I thought the presentation was great. It was very informative. So I learned a lot about how the light plant works. And I think, they are doing serious thinking over there about meeting the town's goals. What I didn't get from it is the sense of an integrated plan that pulls together efficiency, electrification, and supply in a strategic way, so that we basically we develop a system that works to meet our goals. So maybe that's there, and it's a lot to discuss, so it's hard to get in one short presentation. But I would be interested in hearing something along those lines.
I think some of that's in the initial strategic plan, which I know David mentioned is in need of update. But I would agree, there's more in that strategic plan, but it's a lot. And so I think they were trying to just keep it focused.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't hear plans to take us to full electrification. Again, maybe I'm missing something, but I think that's obviously important.
Warren?
I agree that the presentation last month was really good. And I also agree with John that there's a lot more to learn and hear from. So it would be nice to schedule another presentation from them in the not too distant future to cover some of those topics that we didn't have a chance to really get into at the last meeting.
Okay.
And building on what John was saying too, I think it would be helpful if we just note to the leadership at CMLP that it would be helpful to start to position this strategic plan. And in fairness to Dave, he did say just what you said, Jake, that they're working on it. They're trying to update it, but that when all is said and done, that it reflects an integrated plan rather than a separate piece of, we're going to do this on the solar, and then we're going to do this on the supply side, and we're going to do this on the demand side, but we don't really know what the interaction of each of those are. And I don't believe the CMLP wants to do that. I think that they will ultimately have a strategic plan that's fully integrated, because that's the only way to be successful. So it would be helpful to give them the sense of what I think the CAB's struggling a little bit with, particularly since our climate plan isn't divided into saying, well, we're just going to do a solar activity, and then we're going to do this efficiency activity. And somewhere in the middle, there's some electrification going on, but we're not quite sure, how that part all fits. It's a huge task, the integration of all of this, but it seems to me that it's an essential task, and it may be, in fairness to the CMLP, they already know this and they're going to work on that. But we should probably signal and articulate that it's a pretty essential piece to Article 51. At least that's what we believe.
Scott?
Yeah, I mean, I would just maybe add from like a practical standpoint, I think it would be helpful if they didn't cover this, and I may have missed it during the meeting, but what their actual plan is to refresh that strategic plan and timeline. Because it sounds like this group, certainly has some feedback, recommendations that might be worth compiling and sharing with them. I don't quite know what the process for doing that would be, but maybe as an initial step, just understanding from them where they are in that process of updating the plan and when there would be a good opportunity for this group to offer some ideas and perhaps bring them back to present on some of these other questions that we have.
Yeah, I think that's a really good suggestion to try and clarify how we can provide input into the next strategic plan and understand their time frame on that, so that we can have additional dialogue. So thanks for bringing that up.
Who did we say was the liaison, or I don't remember what the plan said in terms of that between CMLP, or did we just assign? I seeming to remember that we just assigned some of those to CMLP as taking the leadership on them, but between CAB and CMLP, I wonder.
Oh, you mean in terms of the climate action plan and the? Yeah.
To make sure that those things that are in the climate action plan get reflected in any planning work that they do.
That's a really good point, Courtney.
Brian would like to speak. I know Pam has had her hand up as well. So I'll transition to Brian first, and then we can go over to Pam briefly. I'm just trying to keep some of the comments from the public brief, because I know we need to have some time for John to talk through the rec piece and for us to move on to the inventory. So Brian.
So I'm not speaking on behalf of the board, but the board has talked about updating the strategic plan. So that will happen this year. And when the first strategic plan was done, it was when the Energy Futures Task Force first wrote its report. They both came out around the same time. So the climate plan will definitely be part of the update as the light board goes forward. And I can't speak on behalf of the board, but I assume that we'll reach out to CAB for being part of that process.
Awesome, thanks. Pam, do you have a quick question?
Hi, Pamela
Hi.
Woodruff, 13 Concord Green. Yes, I wanted to mention that I grew up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and I'm really familiar with nuclear energy and all of the various aspects. I think there is a lot more fear than is warranted. The amount of problem with the nuclear is already built in economically. The plants are there. It's better to use them than to waste that investment. And the benefit of them is that they run all the time so that we can balance out the need for electricity. And I think that the reason the light plant isn't pushing a residential solar is that we've already reached the top of the amount of solar that our local infrastructure can handle. So we can't add more solar until we have storage capability, you see. And that's why people that want to put solar installations in their houses can't do it, because they're limited in how much solar they can put in there by the light plant until we get some infrastructure for storing the excess energy we locally make during hot summer days.
Thanks, Pamela. And I I know that, I believe that David had mentioned there is some capacity constraints in part of town, but not necessarily elsewhere. So I think it is dependent on where you are in town in terms of what's available for the transmission. So thanks for that input.
Can we encourage not putting infrastructure, fossil fuel infrastructure, like gasoline depots and for school buses and things like that?
I'm going to take us kind of back to closing out this topic. Thanks for your input. But I want to make sure we get to John's comments, and then we need to leave time for Kate to walk through the inventory process. John, did you have something that you wanted to present? I think, I don't know if Kate needs to make you the presenter or she has it already, but why don't we transition to that?
John, you should be able to share, but I'm happy to share if you prefer.
Yeah, no, I have some slides. Let me just put it up so everyone can see that. Hold on a second. All right, so can everyone see that? So
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
All right, so yeah, thank you for the time to talk about RECs. It's not my favorite topic, and I'm sure it's not yours either, but I think it's an important topic for us to think about. You know, I have a particular set of views about how RECs get used in local climate planning and meeting goals. I don't expect everyone to agree, but I think it's important that we have the discussion and that we reach some agreement, even if we don't all agree and even if you don't agree with me. So I'll try to go through this quickly. So you know, it matters because how Concord counts its greenhouse gas emissions determines if the town is going to meet its 2050 reduction goals. And Concord buys RECs now and counts RECs in its emissions inventory. So for me, the key question is, does Concord reduce greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere by purchasing RECs? So, you know, I think we probably all agree that our basic challenge is reducing emissions to the atmosphere and eliminating the accumulation of CO2 and other greenhouse gases from our activities. And, you know, some other key points is, so, and then with our electricity, Concord's supply is a regional supply. The emissions to the atmosphere from our electricity use is the result of the aggregate operation of that regional grid. So this map on the bottom left represents all the transmission lines and the generation plants. So they're obviously all over New England, and we import from Canada and New York. And so it's that aggregate effect of that whole system that we're really trying to affect, not what's happening in Concord, at least in terms of electricity. So, you know, we have, our objective really is to reduce grid emissions. So in our inventory, I highlighted the electricity sector. So you can see that for 2008, electricity was 30% of our emissions, and for 2016, it was 23%. And, you know, we'll come back to this, but 2008 and 2016, we measured our electricity emissions differently, which has a small issue right now, but could be a larger issue in the future. So just a reminder, our goals, and we were talking about this in the CAP, we have a 100% carbon-free electricity supply goal. And then CMLP and their strategic plan indicated that they were going to be able to achieve 100% emissions-free supply by procuring renewable energy certificates. So Brian would know better, and Alice would know as well, whether they're actually there with 100% or if that's still in process. So I'm sorry, I'm going to go a little bit over just some basics so I make sure we're kind of all on the same page about how things work. So when we did our greenhouse gas emissions, we're following the global protocol, which is the protocol most cities follow to calculate their emissions. And so generally it's adding up scope 1 emissions, which are direct combustion. So natural gas combustion, fuel oil, gasoline, diesel, that burning direct within the town boundaries, we count those emissions. And scope 2 is electricity emissions, which generally, for the most part, occur outside the town from the regional grid. And scope 3 is basically everything else, which is a lot harder to count, but we're mostly focused on scope 1 and 2. And so with scope 2, there are 2 ways to calculate emissions. So you have to look at how much electricity you're consuming in terms of kilowatt hours or megawatt hours. And then you have to apply an emissions factor. So the pounds or tons of CO2 per kilowatt hour or megawatt hour. And there are 2 ways to come up with that factor. So one is a location-based emissions factor, which is basically the grid factor. So it'd be what eGrid from EPA or ISO New England, which manages grid averages for any particular year. And then there are market-based emissions is the other way. And so that method uses contractual arrangements like what CMLP is doing, where they purchase power, sometimes through PPAs and sometimes buying RECs separately. And then they come up with a factor based on what the portfolio is. Sorry. So I just note that in the global protocol guidance for scope 2, it does say that cities shall use the location-based method and may separately document the market-based method. So if you're going to do market-based, if you're following the protocol, you're really supposed to do both. And then on renewable energy certificates, so on the basics there, so RECs were, I think, originally invented as basically a tracking mechanism for grid managers and regulators to be able to track the attributes of electricity generation. And I don't think originally it was meant to be a commodity, but someone got the idea that you could treat RECs as a commodity and buy and sell them. So RECs can be separated from the power, right? That's an important thing to keep in mind here. You can buy your power from one place and you can buy your RECs from someplace else. They don't have to come from the same place, but they can come bundled as well. And so, but RECs are minted from renewable sources that are governed by state regulation. So basically from wind, solar, and certain other sources. And then the purchasing of the RECs, the acquisition of the RECs is driven by regulatory requirements. So utilities are required to have a certain amount of renewable energy in their portfolio. So the renewable portfolio standard is a key driver that mandates that they buy enough RECs. Last year for Massachusetts, I think it was 15%. And I think through the 2020s, it's going up 2% a year until 2030. And then 1 REC equals basically the environmental attributes of 1 megawatt hour of renewable electricity. So as I understand it, and if people think I've got some of my facts wrong, you should certainly bring that up. I'm not an expert at this. It's a pretty esoteric topic. But so the way I understand that CMLP acquires RECs, it's either through power purchase agreements where you get both the electricity and the RECs from the same source, so they come bundled. So if they contract with a solar farm or a wind generator, they get both. But they also purchase Class 1 RECs separately from the market, and they're brokers who sell these things. And then they pair them with fossil fuel sources of electricity. So we buy fossil fuel generated electricity, like from natural gas power plants, and then the RECs get paired with that to offset the emissions. So what does purchasing a REC accomplish? So, in the first place, it simply transfers the right to claim the environmental attribute from another party. So someone else is holding it. Technically, they could claim the offset. They sell it to you, then you get to claim it. But overall, within the system, there's no change in the amount of carbon reduction. And then, purchasing a REC from an existing source does not by itself add new renewable generation to the grid. You're simply just moving the attributes around. So to claim that purchasing a REC increases the amount of renewable energy on the regional grid and thereby reduces greenhouse gas emissions, you have to believe that the voluntary purchase is having a market effect, so that if you're taking the REC away from a utility, which is under a regulatory requirement to acquire them, that you're creating the pressure for them to go out and find other RECs that they were trying to get through the ones that you just took away from them. And so by that, basically create new generation. So that you have to believe that. So my skepticism is I don't believe that. And it's not quite that black and white, but so why might voluntary purchases of RECs not reduce emissions? So I think to have that market effect, there has to be scarcity in the market, right? You have to take away enough RECs so that utilities cannot find enough to fulfill their regulatory requirement. And therefore, they have to go out and work with developers to build new solar farms and wind farms and so forth. But the utilities have some outs. So if they cannot find enough RECs to fulfill their RPS requirement, they can make alternative compliance payments to the state. So they can basically buy their way out of the problem. And the state sets a price for what those payments are every year. Another issue is Concord's demand for renewable energy and electricity is pretty small relative to the entire grid. And so by itself, it's hard to see how Concord's going to move the market. I mean, my very rough estimate is that using some 2017 numbers, that it's around 0.4% of the REC market if we were buying 100% of our matching 100% of our electricity with RECs. And of course, you can make the argument there's a lot of towns and cities that have aggregation programs now and buying RECs, and that there's a bigger effect. But the important thing is there still has to be a situation where there's market scarcity for you to really change the market. DOER puts out reports on the RPS. And so the last one I saw was for 2017. They said between 2010 and 2017 in 3 years, there was a scarcity. In other 4 years, there were surpluses. So surpluses are not uncommon in the market. I think currently we're in a scarcity situation. If you look at the price of RECs, they're going up a lot. But in a couple of years, it could be the other way.
John, are you almost Are you
Yeah.
almost done? I know we're just running short on time. I don't mean
Yeah,
to
yeah,
cut you off, but
yeah, I'll be there shortly.
okay.
So basically, I think state policy is the main driver of getting renewables onto the grid. And then the other point is, even if we accepted that by purchasing RECs, we cause more renewables to be developed. We question whether one REC should offset 100% of the emissions from 1 megawatt hour of electricity. And I won't go into this, but there's some guidance from the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute about how you might actually calculate the reduction. And so I think, there's a number of implications to think about. But, so is Concord actually reducing emissions, or is it really just balancing out its local carbon accounting to achieve the goal on paper? So I don't think those two things are anonymous. And then if you believe RECs, purchasing RECs actually represent zero emissions, then why don't we just employ a plan of purchasing RECs and electrifying everything and not bother with everything else? Because it's going to be really hard to retrofit all the buildings that we have to retrofit, right? Michael knows that's a big lift. So we also spend a fair amount of money buying RECs. So there's the question of what are the opportunity costs of that money? Could it be better used on efficiency or on-site solar and things like that? And there are a few other things, like a couple other points that you can read later. So basically, I think we should count our emissions using the location-based factor. I think an option is to do both the location and market-based if people feel that's important. But I think it's important to measure our progress against our location-based emissions, not the market-based emissions, because I think it's going to obscure whether we're making progress. I think we'll overestimate how much progress we're making. And in the end, we talked a little bit about this, but I think these issues should be discussed at a town-wide scale. They can't be made in isolation. We all need to be agreed on what the rules of the game are. So I'll end it there.
Thanks, John. I know it's a somewhat complex topic and not everyone has the degree of knowledge of it to necessarily weigh in, but is there anyone who wants to volunteer to either provide an additional perspective or comment? I recognize that it's 7:25 and I'm not sure how much time we're going to have. Kate's going to have to scramble to get through the inventory. So we may have to one option is just to have this conversation at the next meeting and postpone. But I do see, Warren, your hand up, and Ruthie's hand up. So maybe let's take a few minutes and, or is that a high five to table it, Brian? What do people think? I don't want to short shrift it.
I just was going to say, John's been asking for this discussion for many months. He had an excellent presentation, and in lots of ways, I thought he had lots of good information. There's some of it I don't agree with in his conclusion, but I think in fairness to John and to the importance of the topic, we should schedule a real discussion about this at another meeting rather than try to rush through it in 3 minutes.
Yeah, I think I feel the same way. And I think we should make some more time for it in a future meeting, because we're not going to be able to do it any justice, and we won't be able to have a good enough dialogue. Is everyone okay with that?
Is it,
Yeah.
is it possible to get the presentation shared with us, John, so that we could digest it a little bit maybe before our next conversation?
Yeah, that would be
slides.
That would be great, and we can distribute that. And I think that'll give people some more opportunity if they need to do some additional research and to get some additional perspective. So thank you, John, for that overview. We will look to get that conversation on one of the upcoming agendas, hopefully either the next meeting or the meeting after, worst case. Okay.
Hey, can I just say one thing about that? And just, I know we're shortage of time. This is pretty revealing to me, but I'm also wondering, asking the question, what would we be doing differently? So if we have this discussion later, what would we be doing differently once we all sort of understand more clearly class 1 and class 2 recs? It's changed my thinking about class 1. I'm not as fond of it as I thought I was, because I actually worked for a utility and I know that they run it as a business. And should there be a shortfall from renewables, they would simply make the payment to be able to make it whole. So this is, I think as Ruthie's saying, this is really complicated. But if we have a sense of what would be the end game for us to really understand this, what would we do differently? That could be for the next conversation.
Brian, I know your hand, Brian Crounce, I know your hand is up. Did you have a quick comment?
Yeah, we'll just move along. My one request was for page numbers on the slides, and also I agree. Like it will be. There's a lot of complexity there, and it will be useful to digest this a bit. But really, I understand your position, John, a lot better than it did before. So thank you for teeing it up.
Yeah, same here. Okay, thanks. Thanks, guys. We'll definitely take that up at a future meeting. And I'd like to now, in our remaining time before public comments, shift over to Kate for the inventory update.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen if I can find what I want to share. Because now I can't see it, of course. There we go. Okay, can you see my slides? Take that as
yes.
Okay. All right, so I will try to make this as quick as possible to talk about our 2019 inventory update. So the context for those who are new, and just because it's been a little while, you know, as you all know, we have our emissions goal for 2050, but we also have a 2020 emissions goal of 25% reduction. So we have an existing inventory for 2008, which is our baseline year, in our 2016 using the global protocol for cities, which John teed up nicely. And we had a conversation a couple months ago about when do we measure progress, you know, knowing that our 2016 was our last inventory and we have this 2020 goal, and there was interest from CAB and kind of consensus that doing a 2020 inventory year would be skewed because of the pandemic. And so that a 2019 inventory made sense to track progress towards that by 2020 goal. And that going forward would be good to do annual tracking, especially with the data that we do have readily available, so we can see what progress we're making or not. So I mentioned when we last talked that MAPC has a tool that they've made available that follows the methodology that we've used for other inventories and is designed to make it very smooth for people like me to fill it out. So I've been using that to do our 2019 inventory using the best available data. I'll share a couple preliminary takeaways, but the top line was that the tool was really easy to use, and I think will be really good for us going forward. Also, you know, most of the data is available for 2019, so that was pretty straightforward. But there's one data question that I wanted to get your thoughts on before we finish it up. So this is just to kind of give you the preliminary takeaways and pose that question to you for your feedback before I finish the inventory itself. So the preliminary results look pretty good, that we met that 2020 reduction goal. So that's the best news. Also good news on the buildings front, the data is mostly available. And we saw decreased electricity consumption and fuel oil consumption. So overall emissions from buildings is down. Part of that is because of the 50% emissions free electricity, because that's following the market-based methodology that John described, that our 2016 inventory follows, that this tool uses. But there's also decreased consumption. So I think that's good news on the efficiency front. Waste, the data is still hard to get because we have so many people that use private haulers in Concord and we don't have tonnage data for that. But overall, it's a small percentage of community-wide emissions. Transportation is where the rubber hits the road, pun very much intended. So the data is a big challenge. I mentioned this before, that the MAPC has a vehicle census data set that pulls from the registry, and it indicates vehicle miles traveled, so how far vehicles drive every year based on where they're registered. So looking at Concord registered vehicles, how many miles do those vehicles drive? The last update to that was 2014, so it's pretty old at this point. We used that data set for the 2016 inventory because it was a couple years off, but now we're many more years off. Also, in doing this inventory, so I used that 2014 data set and saw that the emissions looked quite different for 2019 versus 2016. And I thought, that doesn't make any sense because it's the exact same data set and the exact same methodology. It should be the same. So I dug into it a bit and found that when we did the 2016 inventory, there was the VMT from that data set, but apparently we didn't have the VMT by vehicle type. So when KLA did the methodology, they applied national average to types of vehicles. So now when we did this 2019, I did have the VMT by vehicle type. So how far did the vehicles that are a passenger vehicle drive versus a diesel truck? So that's where the discrepancy was. So there's a few options, I think, that we can choose from to proceed for finishing this inventory and maybe revising the 2016 to be more accurate. So this is a lot, bear with me, it's kind of wonky, but the crux of it is I think there's 3 options for us to both finish out the 2019 and potentially revise the 2016 now that I have this information. So I think the simplest option is just kind of go with the status quo, leave the 2016 as it is, and follow the MAPC tool for 2019, which would use that 2014 data set by vehicle type, but we can use the 2019 fuel economy because we do have that data. Other option would be use the MAPC tool for 2019, as I just described, and adjust our 2016 to match. So just update that VMT by vehicle type so it's more specific to Concord versus national averages. The third option that I think is a little bit more work, but would set us up to be able to more accurately reflect the progress we've been making in adopting electric vehicles, would be to update both, but for the 2019 inventory, still the best data we have for VMT is that 2014. But we could look at with the assessor's database, the number of vehicles that were registered in 2014 versus 2019 to see if there was an increase in number of vehicles and whether the total VMT should be adjusted. And we could also use the assessor's database to actually look up kind of the mix of vehicles in Concord. We use this to track our progress towards EVs. So for example, I know that at the end of 2019, there were over 400 EVs. But if you look at the data set from 2014, it shows like 20 EVs. So it's not capturing what is actually true in Concord. So we could use our data set to adjust that. You know, there would still be assumptions for all of these things, right? We don't have complete data, but it would be more accurate to Concord. And then we could also do the same for 2016 to make those match. So that's a lot. Those are a lot of options, but I will stop and see if you all have questions or feedback. But that's really kind of the outstanding piece on finishing up the inventory.
Awesome, Kate. Thank you so much for flying through that. I know there's a lot, and I had, we had chatted about this a little bit. So I am in support of moving forward with your recommendation, but I obviously want to hear from other members of CAB. Warren?
Yeah, I strongly urge you to use option 3. And if you don't use option 3, I wouldn't waste the time to do option 1 or option 2. That's just not going to give you anything meaningful. The virtue of option 3, it's setting you up with a methodology that can be used in future years that will actually give you some reasonable comparisons. And so either do that or nothing would be my recommendation.
Thanks, Warren.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
John and then Michael. John, you're on mute.
Yeah, no, I agree. Option 3 would be best and it would help to compare apples to apples with the best data. I was just wondering how you adjust the, like clear if it's 2014 or 2016 data. Are you actually getting new data that you didn't have before, or are you adjusting it on a pro rata basis or something along those lines?
So it would be a little bit of both. So assuming I can get the assessor's data for that year, it would be looking at the mix of vehicles for 2016 in Concord. So like, diesel, gasoline, EVs, plugins. And then it would be looking at the 2014 total VMT and see, do we need to kind of prorate that based on like total vehicles? Like, do we have a lot more vehicles in 2016 versus 2014 that it's worth saying, yeah, there were more vehicles, so the total VMT should be higher. So it'd be a little bit of both. I'd have to give some more thought to make sure that like the methodology was sound, and I don't, the protocol says, where you have more specific data, use it. But I don't want to get too far in the weeds with adding too many assumptions, because then we start to be less accurate.
Yeah, and I think it's important that the 2 years are comparable, that you're not comparing two different things. So
right.
And Michael, did you have a point?
Yeah.
Well,
I
Courtney.
also agree on with respect to the transportation vision. I agree with option 3 for exactly the same reasons that Warren said, but I wanted to bring us back to Kate, buildings, and maybe some clarification on the, as I recall, I don't have this slide in front of me, but I think we showed 25% reduction in electricity and then also in fuel oil. I imagine the electricity number is probably really tight, right? Because you got that from the CMLP in aggregate.
Yeah.
For the
so
fuel oil.
Yeah.
For fuel oil, can you speak how we got that?
Yeah. So
that
you're right.
data?
You're right. The electricity data is tight because we have that from CMLP. National Grid gives us natural gas, so that's also solid. Fuel oil is the hardest to do for buildings because we don't have that actual data from the supplier. So that the option in one of the options in MAPC's tool is to use the census responses to figure out the number of homes and types of homes with average square footage that are oil heated. But I went to the assessor's database and got our assessor's database info for the number and types of homes that are heated with fuel oil. So there's an assumption about, square footage and amount, of fuel per square footage, but at least we have pretty solid data on the number of homes.
Okay, great. It might be helpful later on if you drill down from that. For instance, if we realize that we've saved a whole lot of electricity and we've saved a whole lot of fuel oil, how did we save it? Was this 27 homes that went from, this type of a furnace and a boiler, and they went to an air source heat pump? And because once we see it at that level of data, it's going to become really apparent to us, because we all have a sense of, well, how many houses are there in Concord, right? And how many did we do? And if we see that we did 40%, well, we know we didn't, because we know our neighbors, we just know it, right? Because it's a small little community. So it would be better, it would be easier to judge the accuracy of that with that drill down. But I understand that time is of the essence and you only have so much time on your hands, and drilling down to get that level of specificity is sometimes difficult. But it's also hard to look at this and say, wow, terrific, 25%. And, consumption in these buildings, we must have done an awful lot.
Yeah, I mean, when I finish the inventory, I'll pull out some graphs similar to our other reports so you can see, where was consumption down, why are emissions down. So it would be more insight into the why.
Yeah.
I think I saw Courtney's hand up, and then Scott, I know, wants to make a comment, and then we'll go back to Warren. So Courtney?
Yeah, so I just, I guess, agree with everyone so far. I think that if option 3 is feasible from a data crunching perspective, and you can do that, I think it would be more accurate. That was my first thought when you started down that road, is we must have a different mix of vehicles, at least what I see on the road right now in and around town. And then a question about the waste. Do you think any of the waste haulers, the private haulers, would partner with you in providing data? Have you reached out to any of them? And I don't know if we want to even go that route since it's a small component, but I was just curious, I guess.
I haven't. That's a good question. I can ask my public works counterparts what they think.
Yeah, I don't know. And maybe we can't, but it's just a thought. We've thought about that in other types of greenhouse gas emission calcs. So
I think it's waste management, right? So it's at least for the town program. So they're pretty large. So they might have capabilities that we don't know about.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, Scott?
Yeah, I'll be very brief.
No worries.
I just wanted to offer also my support for option 3 for all the reasons that have already been shared. And then I really just had a question. I'm completely unfamiliar with that vehicle data set that you referenced, but what is their frequency of updating? Do we know when the next update's coming? I mean, it's been what, 7 years? It seems so unusual.
I saw John roll his eyes. I have no idea. It was updated for many years in a row, and then nothing since 2014. So I'm not sure if it's that MAPC doesn't have the capacity to do that, because they get data from the RMV and then they created this census. So I don't know if they just don't have the capacity or they're not getting the data. I have very little insight, but it's unfortunate. I wish we had better data, because that's really the key to knowing, we can figure out our vehicle mix, but we don't know how far they drove. And so that's the missing piece.
Yeah, we have the same problem in Cambridge. So
I suppose you could try and do some sort of local survey, but yeah. Okay.
It would be nice to have some maybe other metrics like number of vehicles and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, Warren. Yes, you had a comment.
I want to follow up on Michael's comment with a question for you, Kate. If somebody who had oil heat installed air source heat pumps, but they retain the oil burner for backup, would they still be listed in the system as having oil heat, and therefore you wouldn't notice any emissions reduction?
Most likely, yes, which is just another challenge to measuring that electrification transition, because that is often the case.
Yeah, so maybe not for this year, but for future years, there may be some virtue to try to quantify the number of heat pumps that have been installed in town, and then use that as an indicator of emissions reductions, and make some estimates about how many of those homes are using the heat pumps for all of their heating or 2/3 of the heating or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's a good point because we have CMLP and they do rebates for the heat pumps. We do have data about how
Yes.
rebates they've given. So we do have some indication of that transition. And I'd have to check with them whether we have the level of detail to know if those rebates went to someone who got rid of their oil or kept their oil. And so maybe there's a way to make some assumptions there that would account for that better than just using the assessor and the square footage.
All right, I think we've heard from just about everyone in CAB. Thanks, Kate, for that overview. Thanks, everyone, for the feedback. I think it's pretty clear the feedback was option 3. So thanks for doing the extra work to pull that together. I think we're right around, we somehow miraculously got to almost back on time, and I'd like to open it up now for public comments. Brian Foltz.
Hi. As always, a great meeting, and I miss you guys. As a, you know, so as for, you know, John's presentation, I echo Warren's comments that it was very factually correct. Some of the conclusions I may disagree with, but that is a good question to ask. John, that is a good question to ask. Is our participation in RECs additive to renewables in the grid? I feel it is. John feels it may not be, but that's where we disagree, and it's a good conversation to have. I think there was a question about should we do our greenhouse gas inventory updates with or without RECs, and John had suggested doing both. If that is manageable and feasible, I think that's a good thing to do. I'd like to also echo what was said at the last meeting from CMLP and from Laura and Dave, which is the first thing that that CMLP wants to do is invest in renewable generation in town. The second thing they want to do is to be able to sign contracts for wind and solar and hydro where it's bundled with the REC. And those are really what CMLP is aiming for. But as a transition, in order to accelerate the transition, they're using RECs. And this was part of 2017's plan. And to John's point about you know, the opportunity cost of the money collected for RECs, that is a continuous discussion with the light board. Is it better to buy RECs or to make that investment into some renewable source in town? Again, with those priorities being, you know, first in-town renewables, second bundled PPAs, and third RECs. And fourth is really we have no option but to buy on the market. That is a good discussion to continue to have, is the opportunity cost of those RECs, because we're going to collect $3.3 million in this year for the purchase and retirement of RECs. Could that money go to a project in town and have more value over time? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I think analysis and projects have to be proposed. I know the light plan is pursuing storage, which is a barrier to more in-town renewable adoption. RECs are not the end solution. I want people to keep that in mind. They are a transition. They are a temporary solution to accelerate our adoption of renewables. And the end game is to have a grid which has a lot of renewables inside the distribution network. But to do that, we need time to make that transition, and that the time needed is going to be quite long because we have to get new agreements. We have to actually have physical changes to the infrastructure. So RECs are the way that we can accelerate to getting to 100% renewables. But I do agree we should account for it separately so that we can see what it is with and without RECs and keep us on path to do it without RECs in the end. But I think the end is more like a decade away and we can't really wait that long. So that's my comment. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. And you win the award for the best use of Zoom reactions for tonight's meeting.
Thank you.
Very active.
Very active.
In a good way. All right, other comments from members of the public? Three, two, one. Pamela, was that a signal that you wanted to make a comment or just saying hi or good night? All right, great. I think I need to follow the rules here to officially adjourn the meeting. So can I get a motion to adjourn, a second, and then we can move forward with adjournment?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Courtney.
I second.
Brian, thank you. All right, everyone. Thanks for a great meeting and all of your input.
Gotta vote.
Take care. We'll see you on February 24th.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.
Night.